Therapists who listen to this podcast, if you are continually trying to learn how to do your best work with chronically ill clients, I want you to know that starting September 23rd to August 28th, every Tuesday, we have a 6-week educational and consultation program for therapists. Victoria Rodriguez is a therapist out of Louisiana who does all of the same work that I do. And she and I have been getting a lot of questions about how we build our expertise in working with this population. And the thing is, she and I were both very lucky enough to get structured training in our grad school programs. And then we both have combined experience of, I think, 10 years of practice. So we've been doing this work, each of us, for quite a while now, and this will be our first go around at really teaching the essentials of what we do in session with our clients to help clients get out of that fight or flight and that stuckness that happens when they're living with a chronic illness. So if that's what you're looking for, the show notes will have the link to sign up. There's an early bird special through August 31st, 2025. That's $300. And then after that, the price will be going up to $350 for the total 6-week program. After the 6 weeks, there will be an alumni group where you all can stay in touch with each other. And this will be a closed group. And I can't wait to see you all there. The Chronic Illness Therapist podcast is meant to be a place where people with chronic illnesses can come to feel heard, seen, and safe, while listening to mental health therapists and other medical professionals talk about the realities of treating difficult conditions. This might be a new concept for you, one in which you never have to worry about someone inferring that it's all in your head. We dive deep into the human side of treating complex medical conditions and help you find professionals that leave you feeling hopeful for the future. I hope you love what you learn here, and please consider leaving a review or sharing this podcast with someone you love. This podcast is meant for educational purposes only. For specific questions related to your unique circumstances, please contact a licensed medical professional in your state of residence. Louisa O'Grady is a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and founder of Louisa O'Grady Nutrition, a practice dedicated to empowering individuals with complex chronic conditions. Louisa has over 16 years of experience with various healthcare settings and integrates evidence-based approaches with holistic, personalized care. Through her firsthand experience with dysautonomia, mast cell disease, hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, she has developed a profound empathy and insight into the challenges encountered by those living with chronic conditions. She's delivered educational workshops and community outreach programs, sharing her expertise with both clients and professionals, and her commitment to advancing patient care extends to her volunteer work with organizations like her local EDS support group and her involvement with the Northeastern U.S. Ehlers-Danlos Society Network of Excellence. Those sound like really great resources. Louisa, thank you for even just sharing that. We have a couple of resources down here in Georgia for EDS, but and I've heard of other larger networks, but that one I haven't heard of. So it's always good, as I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about today, finding resources can be really difficult and really confusing. So it's good to have these larger organizations that are doing this work.
Definitely, for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. I'd love to hear a little bit from you about your practice, where you practice, who you work with, and what's kind of most prevalent right now with the clients that you see.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm in Connecticut, though I do see people throughout the country. About half the states in the country do not have strict licensure, so it's sort of reciprocal. And I also help people on a coaching basis as well. So I typically see folks one-to-one with hypermobility, people that are either diagnosed or not yet diagnosed and suspect it. Folks living with long COVID, dysautonomia, and more specifically, type of dysautonomia, POTS or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, as well as mast cell activation syndrome. I am seeing, speaking of trend, along with the post sort of pandemic era we're in now, I'm seeing a lot more folks with POTS, and maybe they know it, or maybe they suspect it, or maybe they're not sort of putting the pieces together because some of the symptoms can be so widespread throughout the body and seemingly unrelated. They're also concurrently experiencing mast cell activation symptoms as well. And also maybe they've realized they have POTS at that point or been diagnosed with it, but not making the connection that maybe their face is flushing or they're itchy all over. That might be a sign of mast cell activation or misbehaving mast cells. So that's what I'm seeing quite a bit.
Yeah. There's a few different directions my brain wants to go. One is like just thinking about how complex and hard it is to get a diagnosis. I'm curious if you often are finding that people are coming to you with a diagnosis already, or if you tend to be referring out more saying, hey, you need to get a diagnosis. I think this is what you have.
I'd say it's 50-50, or maybe they're coming with one of the three sort of conditions I just mentioned and not yet diagnosed with the other two or one, or not realizing that may be at play as well. So I might see someone for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and hypermobility, but they haven't been diagnosed with POTS, but they're getting dizzy when they're standing. They're having, exercise intolerance. They're having a lot of the symptoms that we see, maybe blue hands and feet because their blood's not circulating well. And we're sort of making the connections together. A lot of what I do too is helping patients advocate and find providers, honestly, because it is such a difficult landscape in trying to find people that are knowledgeable, specifically too, and sometimes in our own area, depending on where we are in the country. The rural areas tend to have a lot more difficulty than, the bigger cities like New York or Boston. But frankly, you'd be even surprised. Some of those doctors, it's hard to get into. They have wait lists for a long, long time, or providers are cash pay. And it's difficult to be able to afford that for many of us who have had potentially, a change in our work environment or we're not able to work full time anymore. So that's a component as well. I'm sure we'll talk about more as well is people are getting gaslit. They'll come to me and they'll say, yeah, well, I got diagnosed with, let's say, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, but my doctors don't think I have POTS or mast cell issues. And some of the criteria for these are, especially if doctors aren't fully aware of what to look for, it can be a little bit tricky trying to get that diagnosis.
So what do you do in those cases in your practice, particularly? Let's say they are seeking a diagnosis, they don't quite have one. Does it matter a great deal for your work if they have a diagnosis versus if they don't? Or do you just, you're just looking at symptoms and just trying to mitigate where you can? What does your work look like in that way?
Yeah, I think it depends. I think there's a huge value in getting a diagnosis because it's not only validation, but also it helps fine tune like guiding how your treatment is going to go, right? It's not some other connective tissue disorder or some other issue that's going on that might take you in a different direction, than if it were Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and then what you have, and we can sort of, and a lot of that's kind of a misconception, like there's no treatment for it. Well, there's things we could do. There's nothing, necessarily on label or specific, but there's plenty of things that, in symptom management that we can do. So regardless if the person has a diagnosis or not, yes, to your point, I'm going to help them manage their symptoms. And for all three of the conditions, mast cell activation syndrome or MCAS, POTS or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, or hypermobility, we can do plenty of things to help through nutrition and lifestyle even way before they get the diagnosis. I would say too, the one condition where, I would say all of the conditions, there is a benefit because some of the symptoms can't be fully managed without medications in some circumstances. In Ehlers-Danlos, it's all of them. In fact, there's widespread symptoms that can occur because they affect our entire body. We have connective tissue in our entire body. We have mast cells in our entire body. POTS, because it affects our autonomic nervous system, that can affect anything from our guts to, again, we can get brain fog, which many of us do, myself included. And so there are things that I think can be beneficial for people, especially with, like, say, mast cell, where maybe they can try H1, H2 blockers over the counter, but those and different things we do with nutrition and lifestyle, but that's only taking them so far. They might need other mast cell stabilizing medications. So I think that's where the value kind of comes in addition to that validation and kind of getting you that direction.
Yeah. I'm just curious, what are some of the other mast cell stabilizing medications that are out there?
Yeah, one that I commonly see, and frankly I'm on as well, is cromolyn. Typically, that can help with gastrointestinal symptoms associated with mast cell activation syndrome. In US, a lot of times it's given in these little ampules, and you'd have to take depending on your dose and what your doctor gives you, 2 or more ampules before you eat, a half an hour before you eat. So that's one of them. There's leukotriene inhibitors, like montelukast, if I'm saying it right, hopefully. There's other stronger H1 blockers like ketotifen, which sometimes or typically needs to be compounded. So if you're not responding to the typical, like, Allegra, Zyrtec, or what's the third one? Zizal's one of them, Claritin, then maybe the doctor may feel like that's something that's more appropriate to help manage your symptoms. There's probably more that there's even newer things that some of the doctors I've heard rumblings about are trying, like those GLP-1s that we all hear so much about for weight loss. We hear mostly in that arena. It's believed to also help with stabilizing mast cells, or I think still researching sort of how that works, but it's typically like microdose from what I'm hearing. And this is more like coming on the horizon type stuff. But I think because it can be a very wide spectrum of how people, this condition presents for people. Some people have it more on the mild side. Some people are going into like anaphylactic reactions and need a lot more medication management or need more interventions. So it's definitely a spectrum. So I think providers are kind of looking outside of the typical things to try and see how to help manage people with this condition.
No, I'm really excited to see what new research comes out with the GLP-1s, because we are the thing is, everyone thinks it's a weight loss drug, but I just am so interested in why it's a weight loss drug and all of the mechanisms that happen in the body that it's helping in the body that probably then lead to the weight loss, rather than it just being, oh, it made you shed some pounds and now you're healthier. No, like, we know that that's not the case. We typically heal something internally, and that's why the weight loss is coming off. So curious if you have thoughts about that.
Yeah, and it slows gastric motility. So I definitely should note that for some of us with, POTS and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome specifically, sometimes we can already have altered gut motility. So that could be a concern for someone that's already having slowed motility, and then that can slow it further. That can exacerbate symptoms. For them, again, I'm not a doctor, just things I see in practice as a dietitian, but, it's something that you and your doctor would want to talk about to see if it would be a good fit for you as well in that respect. So that can make it so people have less of an appetite. And then we've all heard about, how people have loose skin and different things, loss of muscle mass. It's because in the bigger doses that are typically given for weight loss, it's exacerbating some of those side effects, and it's quick. And sometimes people lose weight quickly, don't have enough protein on board. So I think not only working with your doctor, but perhaps if you are on those medications, shout out to working with a dietitian too, so they can help guide you, managing those side effects as well as preserving lean mass.
Yeah, definitely. I think being so clear that Like, I think we can see so much benefit at such small doses. But yeah, you're right. Like when it's being advertised for weight loss and it comes off quickly, like, and I was actually just talking about this with somebody today earlier, like the the science around a medication and then the companies that monetize that medication, the companies are going to do whatever they want to do, whether it's ethical or not ethical or completely aligned with the science or not. Like, and so we have to, I think, especially right now in our current like administration and political context, we really have to be able to separate the actual science from what the pharmaceutical companies are saying or from the media and what they're saying. Like, they don't understand the science. And so that's where it gets conflated, because then it's like, look at all this damage that GLP-1s are doing. Yes, but it's not the GLP-1, it's the dosage and it's the amount and it's the lack of education. And so I think this is a really important conversation.
Definitely. And the pharmaceutical companies have that financial interest. So even if they're the ones performing those particular studies versus like someone that's a third party, you're going to see potentially a different spin on it than if it is that third party in that like sort of more objective than subjective point of view. So definitely. And our doctors, that are savvy in these areas tend to be the ones that could be a good resource if they're familiar and work with these drugs.
Yeah. So I think the biggest question on my mind when it comes to, of course, dietetics and MCAS, the first thing that's going to come up is, tell me about a low histamine diet. Is it necessary? Is it important? Is it not? What is the myths and facts about a low histamine diet?
Yeah. And you're right. There are a lot of myths. So I think a lot of people, I'll just back up and say, a lot of people come to me and they are on this their doctor told them to be on a low histamine diet. In all fairness, doctors barely have enough time to get through all the medical stuff, let alone 8 to 15 minutes, let alone any of the nutritional stuff. So they've been told to go on a low histamine diet and they've been on it indefinitely, or they think, a lot of people feel like they need to be on it indefinitely. It's great to help calm down the mast cells, but it's not the only thing that's going to impact, our mast cell activity. So I'll kind of come back to that. But these elimination diets, like a low histamine diet or a low FODMAP, if you guys have heard of that, probably, those are really intended to be temporary, like 2 to 4 weeks, maybe a little bit longer depending on the situation. And then the intent is kind of reset things, then reintroduce, one food at a time, maybe in a small amount, and then increasing as you're tolerating. And even better if you can do a food and symptom journal so we can kind of track it objectively. That's the intention. So the other things, a lot of times we're immediately blaming the food, but the other things that can impact, there are so many of them. Environments, like, is it change of season? Is it like it is here in Connecticut? Is it barometric pressure changes? Are there odors that trigger your symptoms? Is light sensitivity triggering your symptoms? Is sleep quality? If our sleep is off, that can throw everything off. Stress is one of the biggest triggers for mast cell activation. Is there mold in your house, or does mold trigger you and it just rained outside? So not to say these things to freak anybody out, but just to give you some perspective that there are other things besides the food. And if you're doing a food symptom journal, including some of those things that are relevant at the time, like I just got in a fight with my spouse last night, and I had an increase in my symptoms. So it wasn't the tomatoes that I ate last night. And so we can look at these over a week, 2 weeks, whatever you're able to track, and kind of see if there's any patterns. And the intent isn't really fear, it's really empowerment to try and figure out what those triggers are, because they're going to be different from person to person. Sometimes I don't even start with a full, like, especially if somebody's already like maxed out on everything, in the sense like they're overwhelmed, they're, what's the word, burnt out because of all the health things going on, which is totally and completely understandable. And they're maybe restricting other things already because they can't tolerate it, to eliminate this entire chunk of things might feel or be too overwhelming. So to kind of take out some of the heavy hitters like fermented foods and maybe leftovers, and we come up with maybe a strategy to take, any of these meals you made, and if they're freezable, freeze little portions. They have these great little silicone containers that they're little, like almost like big ice cube trays. And you could just throw some of your leftovers in there, freeze them off, and freezing kind of halts that histamine production. And then it's win-win, because then when you're fatigued, you can just pop them out and make, a leftover meal, and you don't have to worry. So it isn't, I don't even take a one size fits all approach for that, for like managing mast cell and histamine issues. And especially given the gamut of sort of presentation and symptoms, and everyone's sort of in a different place with it.
Yeah. It is really scary. It's scary to like make some of these diet changes because it does require such a lifestyle overhaul. I was never really able, like, we all, and there's so much push for, what the word is slipping, meal prepping. And, that's my family, like that's how we get through the week. But I've also never tried to calm my symptoms down by limiting leftovers. And I get scared with some of the restrictive or like the rigid kind of, because it's a very slippery slope into like just eating Chick-fil-A every day because like you don't have anything in the house, and like I don't know, it's difficult. And that's why I'm curious about the diet lifestyle changes, like, and what is absolutely necessary and what is not. But what I'm hearing is like it's really different from person to person.
It is, because maybe their presentation or the way that their symptoms are showing up is very mild in mast cell symptoms, but it's heavier. The other thing is, if your POT symptoms aren't well controlled, and there's even plenty of nutrition and lifestyle things we can do on that arena, and your body's like sort of fighting for like hemodynamic stability, like stabilizing our blood pressure, our heart rate, things like that, trying to get things back into gear, then that can trigger a mast cell response. So sometimes it's coming at it from a different angle. Like maybe it's something as simple as saying, when you're eating, why don't we do some belly compression? It's $20. Like get one of those wraps, kind of like a pregnancy C-section wrap, or, an abdominal binder, or, waist-high shorts, something easy, and wear that during your meal. See if that helps some of your symptoms, because sometimes we can mistake a reaction to a food for sort of a POTS reaction, or our body sort of misbehaving for other reasons, trying to help us, but misbehaving in a way for other reasons. So it might be doing it. I love anything where we don't have to restrict. Like that is so my wheelhouse. Like I want to do things that are adding and benefiting people's lives rather than taking things away. So I'm huge on that.
That's fascinating. Can you explain a little bit more about how a belly band would help someone with POTS in their digestion?
Yeah, great question. So when we eat, a lot of our blood's diverted to our abdomen or our belly. And when that happens, it's not circulating back out to where it needs to go. So people can have an increase in symptoms. So by squishing it a little bit with the compression, kind of like we always talk about those, lower extremity, like the socks and things. But honestly, the belly ones are actually a lot more valuable to many people in symptom management. And it's not to say there's no benefit to the socks or anything, but there really is. They're finding, and I can't quote an exact study at this point, but
That's okay.
I think it's a little bit more anecdotal. But I've heard it from numerous providers in listening to sort of other podcasts, and definitely seen it in my practice where people find it tremendously valuable to wear abdominal compression. It does not need to be those crazy, like when I first got diagnosed, they're like, you need to wear tights waist high. And I got those like, and it said 30 to 40 milligram, I can't remember, millimeters of mercury per whatever. And so those are the really stiff, like hard to put on. I got
Mm.
those things and my heart rate like going to like 160 putting them on.
Yeah.
That's it. So it's like so exhausting just putting them on. So I'm like, this
Mm.
can't be helpful. So I think it's modifying that in a way. And some people even wear running, like compression, comfortable athletic gear, and that works for
Yeah.
them. So it's finding a way that like works for you, because it's better to do it in a sort of modified way than not do it
Yeah.
at all.
I
Um,
love that. And would you put the belly band on before you eat? And then how long would you leave it on for?
I would keep it on for at least like an hour or two after you eat.
Okay.
Just, while you're digesting. If you're feeling like pretty good afterwards, you don't have to keep it on all day. I mean, the biggest benefit would be if you could wear it all day. If you can't, the most important times are when you're eating and then if you're doing activity.
Okay. That's really great. I've never heard that tip before. So I always love a new tip that I haven't heard.
Me
Um,
too.
and it's so easy too. And you're right. Like I couldn't even put the compression socks on. I was like, screw this. And I'm not doing this. I
Absolutely. And
mean,
we tend to kind of, because we don't know what other options are out there. We're like, all right, the doctor told me to do this. Whoa, that's really hard. It's like, what would I think to go get like a C-section, abdominal binder, and that's going to help me, or
right.
a waist cincher? I probably
Yeah.
wouldn't immediately think that as an alternative, or athletic pants or shorts, that are waist high. I wouldn't immediately think of that. The other thing is
Right.
Spanx. Like even Target sells some good like cheaper Spanx that are waist high, and they have like
Yeah.
shorts and stuff. So that's another option.
That's awesome. And yeah, such an easy thing to try. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It just means that wasn't your
Absolutely.
particular issue, and the cheap way to do some trial and error. Cheap and not dangerous.
Yes, very low risk. I agree. And I love things like that, and I'll make the suggestion to people, but it's entirely up to what they're comfortable with. And most people I meet with, they're like, oh, that's an easy, that's a cheap enough
Yeah.
thing to try, without the risk, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some other, so we kind of actually talked a little bit about some MCAS tips, like freezing your leftovers, and you gave a specific, those silicone molds, I think are really, is it the mold where it's almost like, kind of like the popsicle mold, or is there a
Yes.
different, okay.
They're
Yeah.
like square. They have different sizes, but they're like square. And again, like they could be just, a cup or two cups, where you can get all different sizes and get the size that you feel like you want for your portion. Sometimes I
Yeah.
freeze like, a soup or stew or something like that, or just an entire, like I use bigger containers if I want to do like an entire dinner, like make my own TV dinner. Like when I make anything, I usually make extra just with the intention of like having something for those days when I do not feel like cooking.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. So we've got MCAS pots, and then I'm curious if there are some Ehlers-Danlos syndrome specific. I mean, I know it's a trifecta. They all kind of go overlap. But
definitely.
is there something specifically, and there's so many different presentations of EDS, so I know it might not be a simple answer, but what are some of your go-tos for EDS patients around nutrition and eating?
I think because many people with Ehlers-Danlos have some degree of dysautonomia. Maybe not everybody, but many do. Some of the POTS sort of strategies will be integrated into that. Like, for example, the small, frequent meals and snacks versus going a long time to try and like mitigate that blood sugar roller coaster where we eat something and it's huge and we have this huge spike, and then, that subsequent drop afterwards. And then we're starving or we're going a long time between eating, and that can increase the brain fog and dizziness and, a number of different symptoms. So that's really super helpful. I usually suggest like every 3 or 4 hours having something, kind of taking it, and if you have those bigger meals, and kind of splitting it and then spreading it through the day. And that could help keep the energy level stable. And then within those meals and snacks, making sure you're having a source of protein like chicken, fish, turkey, nuts, beans, dairy, depending on what you can tolerate, a source of like complex carbs. So thinking like sweet potato or a piece of fruit versus like juice or, a dessert type food. Not to say you can never have those or you should never have those. And then having a healthy fat if you can too, like an avocado or a little bit of olive oil or something that sort of those fat and protein pieces are going to take the carb and your blood sugar and kind of steady it a little bit more because they're more slowly absorbed than the carbohydrates are. So that's sort of the other piece. Anti-inflammatory sort of shift. It's not like this overnight thing, or sometimes people are like, give me a list of foods I can and can't have. And it's like, wait, let's start with what you're doing and what is comfortable for you. And maybe there's different areas of opportunity or different little swaps we can make that can make it nice and comfortable so it integrates seamlessly into your life. So like, again, more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, more fiber in your diet, more, what am I missing? Probably healthy fats, I think I said. So sort of trying to eat things a little bit closer to nature whenever possible. Of course, with fatigue, sometimes we need to rely on some convenience foods, and that's okay too. But those foods are going to tend to help your body with inflammation. And that's huge within all of these. And especially like if you're experiencing pain and issues with inflammation with Ehlers-Danlos. What's it going to say? Here's the brain fog. It was just there.
I get it.
Thank you. The biggest thing I see with a lot of folks I meet with Ehlers-Danlos is gut issues. And it's true with POTS as well and MASO, but I feel like to a larger degree sometimes with my folks with Ehlers-Danlos. So it might look like bloating, it might look like nausea, it might look like that altered motility, whether it's too slow or too fast or it kind of comes and goes with those symptoms. It might be loose stools or often, honestly, I'm seeing a lot of the opposite, constipation. So slowed motility, trouble moving things out. If things aren't moving, you have more sort of fullness feeling and more potentially more nausea. So navigating around that, it's of course, like anything else, going to look different for each person, like sort of where we intervene. But some go-tos I love are ginger. Ginger's like one of my favorite things ever because you can do ginger tea or ginger chews, and it can help with motility to a little bit lesser degree, but it can. Nausea, it helps sort of settle things out, I feel like. And it's accessible. You don't have to take more pills. So it's just trying to find like those little things that are dual purpose. And it has a ton of other benefits like anti-inflammatory, I think viral, antibacterial. So it's definitely a superstar, I think, in the food category. So it's trying to find things like that will help people manage their symptoms. And then sometimes it's a matter of, increasing the fiber, but the right types of fiber. So soluble fiber, sometimes if you're having bloating, is a little easier to tolerate than insoluble. So that might be oatmeal, that might be apples, and the way that we eat them can also be helpful. Like, for example, if we just want to chomp on an apple, that might not be as easy tolerated as if we peel the skin, maybe cook it at first into heat it up, throw some cinnamon on it, to kind of get our bodies used to having more fiber.
Yeah, can we talk a little bit more about that? Because my brain always goes to food rules and the things that people hear over time. So we hear things like all the vitamins are in the peel. When you boil your vegetables, you lose all the vitamins, and so it can make people scared to then do the thing that their body needs them to do for their condition. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So even if we think about this is kind of like a side detour for a second, but if we think about like the low histamine foods too, like tomatoes, they're spinach, they're like healthy foods, you know? It's not that they're bad. There's no good or bad foods. It's just that even though some of these foods are healthy, like the skin or different preparations, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing for you in that moment. And we're all going to need different things. And I try so hard to steer away from like, this food is good, this food is bad kind of thought, because nothing's really good or bad. It's just what's going to help you move the needle forward, or sort of make your symptoms sort more prominent. And we want to help accentuate the things that help move you forward. And I always try, oh, sorry. I was going to just say, I always try to like work with people and what their preference, like, what do you love eating? What do you miss eating? What do you want to include more in your diet? And we sort of work from there as our blueprint. So it's not like, hey, this is what I had in mind for you. And then it's like, ooh. So
yeah, I love that. And the funny part is I would not have loved that 10 years ago, because I would have wanted you to tell me exactly what I should be eating. Because there was a right and a wrong, and that's the only thing. And now I'm like, wait, like, if I have a bad reaction after I eat apples, it might have nothing to do with being allergic or sensitive. It might, caveat, like, make sure people, but it might just be like too much fiber. And if I eat stewed cinnamon apples, like, and I can enjoy my favorite fruit again, I mean, that's what is better than that?
Absolutely. And I think you raised a good point that I wanted to make that I didn't remember a minute ago about, fiber is something, it is the type, like we have been talking about, but it's also the amount. Like, you don't want to today be like, all right, I haven't been eating fiber, but I'm going to have, 10 servings or even maybe 3 servings. You want to start very low and slow and increase your fluid intake to help move things along.
There's so many pieces that I feel like we just don't know because we're not really taught. But yeah, if you're increasing your fiber, you need extra water to help move the fiber along. And that's something I learned along the way that was an epiphany to me when I first learned it. It's like, oh, and it's so simple when you go to school for it and you learn all of this stuff. And I think that's why people are so flocking to social media for these education bits, because our doctors don't have time to tell us this stuff. Plus they might not know what we don't know. And it's just hard. So, to that point, we talked briefly earlier about gaslighting, and like, I think before we hit record, we were talking a little bit about social media, and it's important for this information to be on social media because people are craving this information and they're getting a lot of wrong information from somebody who, like, for example, let's say somebody had no idea about any of their diagnoses, and for whatever reason, they figured out that when they were wearing compression wise, their gut felt better. Their digestion felt better. And then they go on social media and they're like, guys, I found the cure for like gut health. And that's like what social media sounds like. It's like, it's just one person with their experience found this like little thing that improved their life. And then they get on social media in a sensationalized way. And they say, I found the answer. And then like 20 people get on board and they copy it. And before you know it, it's just a fire of misinformation being spread. And so I just think we as professionals really owe it to ourselves and to everyone in society to be on social media, trying our best to dispel misinformation, give helpful tips where possible, where there are, sometimes there is an easy tip to be given. But again, that easy tip may or may not work for you based on the 100 of other factors that are happening in your body at that moment.
For sure. And I think, a lot of it relies on, like you said, that sensationalism to grab people's attention, but it's just one little like blip in time or one piece of the story. And it's not like giving the full picture. So, and I would be leery of anything for these conditions that says, this is going to cure. I've gotten those advertisements that are like, the cure, it's literally, I think, called the cure for POTS. And I'm like, I haven't seen that in the literature. And if that were the case, like all of us would be doing that. Like if there was this magical cure. So, I mean,
Yes.
it's great to hope for those things, and they're probably, somewhere down the line, but we're not there yet. And anybody promising that is probably selling snake oil.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
is important for us to
That
be
brings
on
me
there.
back to yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That brings me back to a question around MCAS. Is MCAS something that we have to manage for the rest of our lives, or is there a way to, quote, get rid? I realize we all have mast cells, right? So I'm imagining they can be highly activated at any time, but what is the trajectory of MCAS? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I'm sure the doctors that like specialize in it may feel differently or have more insight onto it. But from what I've seen, I think it can be well managed. I feel like, so we all have mast cells, right? To rewind and to kind of dovetail off of what you said. And they're there to protect us. They're good. We don't want to get rid of them. Um, but they're sort of misbehaving or overreacting to things. So there are things that we can do to help manage them better. In addition, we talked about medications a few moments ago. There's definitely things from a nutrition standpoint, not only the food stuff we talked about, but also sometimes supplements, which I kind of use just in that vein as a supplement to help add on and sort of when we can't meet certain needs through food or there's certain symptoms that are flaring, they can sort of help uh, move the needle a little bit. So I do use them strategically. On top of that, I think things like activity that is gentle and personalized, as well as nervous system regulation, I think is incredibly valuable to helping to tamp these down, and then making sure if your environment does have something like mold, or there's things that you can control and improve on in, like, say, fixing mold in your house, which I have in my house, it turns out. It's one of the top things that can really be an underlying cause for the mast cells to continue to sort of misbehave. So it's kind of addressing some of those root cause, and I think you can really tamp it down. I'm not sure that I don't know that you can cure it. I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I
Yeah.
think you can kind of bring it down to a like manageable
Yeah.
level.
So you bring it down to a manageable level, and then you kind of have to manage it forever, but maybe you don't have to be as rigid. Is that, or do you
That's
think you
my
kind of always have to be that rigid?
I don't know. I don't think you do. I think once you get things in a good place, I've seen where people are, able to sort of like, you don't need to follow a restrictive, and not that I would advocate for a long-term restrictive diet anyway, but people
Yeah.
find they can add more foods in, and it's sort of this healing process. I think nervous system regulation is so valuable in that process, because sometimes our body is in this like loop where, we're like almost our brain is almost hyper vigilant in trying to respond to these threats and activating those mast cells. So just doing some of those practices can really help be a good sort of, for some people, even first step to helping just tamp them down a little bit. And then it allows you to have enough sort of energy and ability to maybe take another step and figure and do another sort of intervention. The medications are also extremely valuable for that too. So,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
I don't want to discount that. I don't mean that nutrition, the,
Nervous system regulation.
yes, thank
Yeah.
you. I don't want to
Yeah.
say that is more important. I'm just saying each one of these is a good element, and then adding, sort of layering things on at a comfortable pace and an appropriate pace for you can help.
Yeah. That is my soapbox for sure. As a mental health therapist, and
Definitely.
I do get a lot of questions about nervous system regulation. I'm even trained in somatic experiencing. Like, I'm all on board for some good nervous system regulation. However, sometimes just saying yes to the things you want to say yes to and no to the things you want to say no to is enough to regulate your nervous system. So it doesn't always have to be. But I am curious, do you have specific nervous system regulation exercises that you tend to give clients, or do you more so refer that conversation out, or how do you approach that conversation with clients?
That's a great question. I think it depends on their willingness. Some people are like, whoa, that's way too woo-woo for me. So then I kind of start with the like, hey, you're mentioning you have digestive issues. By the way, you have POTS. Your body's probably in a sympathetic or fight or flight phase or state, and you're going to eat. You're not going to digest as well if you're in that state than if you took 3 deep breaths beforehand with a longer exhale each time. Try it. It can't hurt, right? And that will put your body into this parasympathetic or rest and digest state, and your body will be prepared and ready to accept that food. So let's start there. Just do that before your meals, whenever you remember. And sometimes that like is that first building block. It doesn't have to be you're like in this whole program.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. But if people are willing and they're like, oh my gosh, I am interested in learning more about this. I love, some of the programs that are out there. And I think different strokes for different folks. Like some people might, I've tried a couple of them at this point, and one really resonated with me. So I think, between like DNRS or Gupta or Primal Trusts or, there's even more than that. But, some of those big ones, one might resonate way more for one person and another person might find a different one. So I think if they're willing, I do recommend nervous system regulation as some part of their puzzle in some capacity for all of my patients.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, those are 3 big names for sure. If my audience is hearing you, they know I always roll my eyes at DNRS because I had such a bad experience with it. But Gupta and Primal Trust, you're right. I find Gupta to be a little bit better for like the type A type people who like a very rigid kind of, although, I think they can learn better in that environment, but then we usually do some work in the therapy sessions. We usually have more work to do, like of why they couldn't quite get the Gupta program or why they couldn't, sometimes even with Primal Trust. So it is interesting. They all offer kind of a different flavor, a different style of it all. And yeah, I'm a fan of trying different things and taking what works for you and leaving the rest and not feeling like this program is it. And if you failed this program, then you're doomed or anything like that.
Definitely. And I should also add, in almost every case, make sure that, because everyone I'm working with has a chronic condition, in most cases, a chronic invisible condition, which has such a stress on our bodies, our minds, our existence. So I think everyone, maybe this is too much of a blanket statement, but I think everyone should have a therapist. So I really do try to align people with therapy as well, because I think it's an extremely valuable piece of the healing process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, as a therapist, we have our own therapists as well. And we all just need that outside support. Like there's only so much you can do in your own head. I think sometimes you just need to give up a little bit of control and let somebody else guide you in that way. That was a big piece for me as well. Yeah,
definitely.
I feel like we really hit on everything I was hoping to. You gave really actionable tips as well as dispelling some bigger kind of myths that are out there. So that was my biggest thing.
Oh, awesome. Okay, cool.
Where can people find you?
Sure. I have my own website as well as an Instagram. Website is www.louisa.o'grady.com, or my Instagram is at louisao'grady.rd.
Great.
So I'd love to, and you could direct message me, or my website has my email as well. I'd love to connect with you.
Awesome. Well, I so appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for your wisdom. And I look forward to sharing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you learned something new today, consider writing it down in your phone notes or journal and make that new neural pathway light up. Better yet, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a DM on Instagram, email me, or leave a voice memo for us to play on the next show. The way you summarize your takeaways can be the perfect little soundbite that someone else might need. And lastly, leaving a review really helps others find this podcast, so please do if you found this episode helpful. And P.S., clicking subscribe ensures you'll be here for the next episode. See you then!